Quick video about redline Hot Wheels. Sorry, I got a squeaky chair. Redlines were made from 1968 to about 75, 76. And basically it's pretty much self-explanatory. You can see the red lines around the tire. A lot of times they're not perfectly even, as you can tell as this one spins. The first couple years of redlines actually had removable wheels, which is pretty cool, but it also is probably why a lot of Hot Wheels in the early years have bent axles, because they are a pain to get off. So if you happen to see one without the wheel, it's still a good nab, as long as this part isn't too bad. So if you ever see Hot Wheels without a wheel and they still have a little tiny white wheel, it's good to grab. Now, some of the first cars, if they were actually like this Corvette or this Charger, they would call them custom Corvette or custom Charger. I think mostly because they would have like hood scoops, stuff that were not really commonly found on the true actual automobile. But if there were older cars, they call them classics. Like this is a classic 36 coupe. They have some pretty cool features on some of these redlines too. Rumble seat. Redlines later on had, what you can still find on redlines. Basically, it was just probably cost cutting. They didn't have the red line. Same wheels as this car here has, but no red line. Pretty much that was the only wheel that you could get until the early 80s, maybe late 70s. Then they came out with this gold wire, or not wire, but kind of like a 6-spoke custom wheel. But it was gold in color. I think they had some that came in silver. Also, if you rub it off, the gold coloring can rub off. Then they came out in the not late 70s, but in the early 80s, mid 80s, these gosh awful ugly wheels. They called them Ultra Hots. They came in silver or gold, and I think they finally discontinued them in the mid 90s. But in the mid 90s, about 95 especially, they came out with several different wheel types. 3-spoke, 5-spoke, 7-spoke, wire-laced rims. Too many to really go into. You'd have to buy a Hot Wheel guide and really study it to figure out and have the names of them off the top of your head. This is one of the newer wheels that they have. You'll find that quite often. They also have a really cool new wheel called the Ultra Fast, and they actually are almost like hollowed wheels, where just small pieces of plastic are holding the inner wheel to the outer wheel. Now with the date stamps, now with Hot Wheels, it's much like Barbie. You'll find Barbies in the Goodwill all day long. The backs of them will say 1966. That's the first year they had the swivel waist Barbies. Well, much like Hot Wheels, whatever first year there were that they made the casting is the date stamp. This one is 68. This one is 67, but I don't think it was in stores until 68. I can't remember for sure. You get like this Corvette. That Corvette has a date stamp of 1988. Now this car, I can't remember if this is an actual 88 Corvette or if it's, I think it came out in 89. I think there was a different one before this one. But it's common to find, especially with the 68 Fastback Mustang Hot Wheel. They still produce that one, and it was first produced, it has a copyright of 68 on it, but you'll still find new cars at Toys R Us. That casting and it will say 1968, but really it's just a, whatever year you found it, 2012 even. So you can't go by the dates on the bottom of the car. Especially, example with this one. This is called the Hood, and this one came out in 1970. Then in 1973, they have this one. It's called the Highway Robber. It has a copyright stamp of 69, which actually predates this one, which says 1970. This one did come out in 1970. This one came out in 1973. 73 has a whole unique history in Hot Wheel collecting. Really hard to get into all the details, but basically there's something about a shortage of paint. A lot of the cars were short produced. Some of them were sold only at gas stations. Oh man, I don't fully understand the whole story behind each one, but I think it's the first year they went from like what they call the Spectra flame paint, this glittery shiny color, to just flat enamels. One thing that's tricky with redlines nowadays is that they do make them again. This one here is a car that I bought just a couple years ago. I love 69 Chargers. This Charger wasn't, this casting wasn't made until 2007. So the casting on this one does say 2007. As you can see, next to an actual 1975 redline, the wheels look the same. So if you're in a hobby shop and it's out of the package, or a thrift shop and you see a car with red lines, if the date stamp, like this one, is 2007, you know it's not a true red line. But then when we get into like those Mustangs that I was telling you about, it can be really tricky. You have to be on top of knowing what was available at certain times versus what is available now. A good dead giveaway, the Spectra flame paint. Now they did bring it back on a series of Hot Wheels called the Classics, which cost about twice as much as your normal Hot Wheel. But if they usually would not have the actual red line, they would have those 7-spoke or 3-spoke wheels with a red line. It gets really confusing. So unless it's just like 50 cents, if you come across a car that looks like a red line and they're wanting like 10-20 bucks for it and it's in really good condition, you might want to double check to make sure that it's an actual true vintage red line, because 20 bucks for a car like this isn't too bad of a deal. It's actually pretty good. But if you pay that much for a car like this, you totally just got your butt ripped off, because this was probably about a 50-cent car nowadays. It's just, one of the hobbies where you really have to be on your toes with Hot Wheels. Basically, if they look really beat up, you probably really do have a red line. Take this Nitty Gritty Kitty. I know, then they come up with some great names. This thing I found at the Goodwill for 50 cents. It was missing a wheel, but like I said, those early ones, you can replace them. So I had picked up a junker that's even worse than this one and just pulled the wheels off and put it on this one. You have people that also would love to get cars like this condition because they restore them. I don't know why, because it completely destroys any collector's value. I'd rather have a beat up one than one that's been repainted and everything. But while I have the video going, I gotta show this one off. This one was one of my brother's. I always loved this thing as a kid. Of course, I never got to play with it because it was, one that he kept from his childhood. But could you imagine going to school in a school bus like that? This air scoop blower, I pulled it off one of the modern remakes of the school bus that they had. since the original was missing. But as you can see, this one still has all its decals. Well, most of the decals.